I do want to start with this. How should fans look at the win yesterday? We have talked about some of the errors. We have talked about some of the mistakes, whether it was Jordan Love's interceptions or special teams gaffes. How should fans view yesterday's win over the Texans?
I think they should probably be sending flowers, beers, pizzas, whatever to Brian Gutekunst's office for finding a kicker. I mean, you think about it too, Jen, like the moves that Goody's made, the Narveson one did not work, but to his credit, he fixed it. But he's been on a pretty good run here. Malik Willis, that worked out huge, kind of maybe saved the early part of the season. Brandon McManus, pretty good. Xavier McKinney, Josh Jacobs, the draft picks, not necessarily the first round pick because he hasn't really played much, but Cooper, Bullard, Evan Williams. I mean, it's been a pretty good run to put this team together and where it is. And look, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I was ready to say, look, if they lost that game yesterday, they haven't beaten a good team because of the 4 wins previous that they had. Those teams came into this past week at 7-15, and the teams that, including Houston, were 13-3. That they would have lost to had they lost to Houston. So I think it's a good win. I think there's some things that we've seen from Jordan Love that are the second-year evolution of a guy who A, feels more comfortable, which is good, but B, maybe feels too comfortable and is going to take some chances that they're going to rein back in. I mean, look, Chewy, you saw the same thing with Brett, right? Like, he went really, really good, and then there was that, second year. I mean, I think it was that second year where they had the big infamous meeting where they wanted to bench him, and Mooch said no. And I just think that's sort of natural in a second year when you think maybe you're a little bit better and more comfortable than you are.
Well, yeah, I was saying earlier in the show, because Brett was reckless, but they were it's a lot easier to be reckless when you have a top 5 or a top 1 defense. They cover up a lot of warts,
Great point.
But I wanted to ask you, Rob, you think Josh Jacobs should have got more carries yesterday? I thought they could have used him a little more.
Yeah, there was one series, and I don't remember exactly where it was, but I remember thinking to myself, why is Emmanuel Wilson in the game here? And not Josh Jacobs. It was probably, I want to say it was probably somewhere midway through the third quarter. So there's no doubt. I thought they were running the ball really well. I don't know what the final numbers ended up being, but at one point I remember looking down and Jacobs was averaging 6.8 yards a carry. And I think he only had maybe, a dozen, 10, 11, 12 carries at that point. I do think there's some merit there. But I still think they're figuring out exactly what they want to do on offense in terms of a mix of him, of running the ball, of play action. We're still only seven games into this thing right now. There's 10 games left. At this point last year they were 2-5, right? And now we're able to nitpick a little bit about them being completely different, and the start of the season being about as good as you could ask for, all things considered, given what they've been through.
Is that the best defensive performance they've had all year?
Well, I thought it was the most creative game for sure. I just went back and watched the sacks. Everyone's talking about how much they blitzed. I guess it depends on what your definition of blitz is. Eric Wilson had 2 sacks. Those were, quote unquote, he was a blitzing player, but only one of them was actually more than 4-man pressures. In fact, Gary's sack, just a 4-man rush. McKinney's sack, 4-man rush. Obviously, McKinney is running a safety blitz. Wilson's first sack, 4-man. Second sack was the 6-man pressure. So, everyone's like, well, they blitz like crazy. Technically, from a stat standpoint, the way that it's tracked by most people, they actually only sent more than 4 rushers on 17% of Stroud's dropbacks, yet he was under pressure. I tweeted out this morning. He was under pressure. I think it was 45%.
Yep, 45% of the time, according to ESPN stats and information.
So that's a remarkable return on your pressure investment.
Rob Demovsky hanging out with Jen, Gabe, and Chewy here. So are we buying into Jeff Hafley a little bit more then? Because I know there were people who were like, and we have talked about it a lot here, about the pass rush and it not getting home and them not being able to get pressure with it. And yet Hafley showed that, okay, maybe that's not going to be our strong suit, but I can still dial up pressure. I can still make a quarterback uncomfortable in other ways. To me, that shows that, like, this guy actually is pretty smart. Mm-hmm. This guy actually is, as the season goes on, going to be able to cater his defense to the opposition.
Yeah. The only downer I'll bring to it, Jen, is that they still struggle to stop the run a little bit. I mean, I realize Joe Mixon's a really, really good player, but that was a problem yesterday, run defense. It was a problem for a large part of the game. Now they got some key run stops. But, yeah, I think, from Hafley's standpoint, he was doing it all with takeaways for the most part. But I thought yesterday they won the game with his creative ways to rush the passer and using different guys. And, would you still like to see more from Lucas Van Ness and Preston Smith? And I know Gary had a sack and another near sack. But, yeah, from a traditional edge rush standpoint, you'd still like to see more. But I thought this might have been Hafley's most creative game plan.
Rob, should we expect more out of 𝘃𝙀𝙀𝙀? We were talking earlier in the show. I mean, he's paid a lot of money, but I think Gabe said his special teams unit are ranked 30th right now.
Is that what it is? I have not looked at that.
Pro Football Focus had him ranked 30th going into yesterday's game.
Okay. I mean, I will say this. Like, there were 2 returns yesterday where each guy did the wrong thing. There was one that should have been fair caught or let go, and the one that should have been returned that wasn't. I'll say this, though, and talking to Daniel Whelan after the game, we were talking to him about that snap on the game-winning kick, and, even Matt Orzich, we asked him, was it lower than you wanted? And he goes, way lower. Daniel Whelan, the punter/holder, told us that 𝘃𝙀𝙀𝙀 throws him bad snap after bad snap after bad snap, drilling him on getting him used to handling those things. So while in the big picture, Chewy, I agree with you. That's a detail thing, though, that, I don't know that every special teams coach is doing hands-on. I mean, it's one thing you could have an equipment guy do it, but when your special teams coordinator is literally the one throwing you bad snap after bad snap to get you ready for that, that's a little thing that I don't know that everybody does. So on the big picture, I agree with the premise. There are some things that maybe Rich is doing, though, that are helping him too.
Yesterday, Rob, we saw. Eric Stokes played, single-digit snaps, and we saw more on the outside corner from Keyshawn Nixon, which meant more opportunities for Evan Williams and then Javon Bullard in the slot. Do you think that's Texans specific, or is that going to be more of the base alignment for Hafley in the defense?
I think that's the way it's trending, for sure. I think Stokes only played a few snaps. I think it was when they went to dime. It was him and 26 Valentine. I think this is the way they've sort of settled in right now, as long as they have this group healthy. And look, it's a pretty remarkable transformation from Keyshawn Nixon, who basically was only a slot guy, and now is playing out there on the edge. And Bullard snaps have gone down. He was a full-time safety, and then now he's only in the sub stuff. But Evan Williams made another timely play yesterday. So I think this is the way they're settling in, and it would not surprise me if this is the way until something changes with an injury. This is the way they go.